Now, wills and inheritance are often, sadly, a source of irritation and tension in families. And, I find it incredible that somebody, just listen to this, someone in the crowd said to him, "Teacher, tell my brother to divide his inheritance with me." Somebody had a real issue. Something was obviously happening between two people, and they felt so up for it that they wanted to ask Jesus about it. And of course, Jesus would not respond to that, because he tells them quite clearly, "Who appointed me a judge or an arbiter? I'm not going to get involved in those kind of disputes between brothers." But it's very interesting. The passage says this. Then he said to them, "Watch out, be on your guard against all kinds of greed." Now, that's the context of the wonderful parable and story of a rich man who is described as a fool. Let me read to you from Luke 12, verses really 16 through to 20. And he told them this parable. The ground of a certain rich man yielded an abundant harvest. He thought to himself, "What shall I do? I have no place to store my crops." Then he said, "This is what I'll do. I'll tear down my barns and build bigger ones, and there I'll store my surplus grain. And I'll say to myself, I'll store my surplus grain. I'll say to myself, you have plenty of grain laid up for many years. Take life easy. Eat, drink, and be merry." But God said to him, "You fool, this very night your life will be demanded from you. Then who'll get what you have prepared for yourself?" You see, it's a real powerful story, a warning to be on our guard against those things that are greed. As we've talked a little earlier in this show, significance and worth is not really in positions we hold. It is about our life hid with God in Christ. That's what really matters most of all. As I read the teaching of Jesus in the Gospels, you have to conclude that greed has little to do with how much a person has, but everything to do with their attitude towards material things. That would certainly be something that emerges from this parable. We guard against greed with a strong relationship with God. In fact, if we live in a close relationship with God, the concept of greed doesn't really become something that takes over our lives, because the most important thing is that relationship which we guard and we hold absolutely paramount in all things that we do. In a world that is permeated with greed in so many ways, we need to be on guard. The parable is concluded by Jesus, reminding us that we are accountable for what we do with the material possessions and our attitude towards God. Accountability is a powerful word. It's one that we use in business. It's one that we use in relationships. It's one that clearly feeds into all leadership understanding. Accountability. In fact, those two words I would suggest, accountability and responsibility, which are not necessarily quite the same thing, are important if anybody has an important standing, a position in community, has a particular role to play. And when it comes to material possessions, it really is a reflection on our inner attitude toward others and our inner attitude toward God. And they're critical if we're going to live life to the full. And I think really it's a powerful word, isn't it, when it tells us that Jesus talks about a person being, "You fool." I mean, a fool is somebody who really, to some extent, has never really thought through the implications of what it is that they're doing and what flows from it. They're living only for the moment. They're living only for the present gain. They're not making any consideration of what actually is the result, the consequence of what is happening. "You fool, this night your life is being demanded of you." You've been building up everything for yourself. You've been building up. You've got bigger barns, as it says here in the text, which farmers would understand. But I think we can all understand. You're building all that up, but when it comes down to everything else, when everything's been stripped away, what matters? What matters is what we have kept for God. What matters is how we are living our life in relationship to him. So material possessions, however significant they might be, become secondary to the most important thing, which has to be our relationship with God in Jesus Christ. Otherwise, we will always be a fool. And there are plenty of fools around. And fools are not necessarily immediately identified as such. You may be a fool in public life. You may be a fool with many possessions. You may be a fool with great position in our society. But you're still a fool if you have not kept the things that matter most. If you have not kept at the heart of your life those things that can never be taken from you. Those things that really give value and worth. If you like, they are the underlying values by which we live our lives. And here, certainly that would be important. So, you then see how that story relates to the argument between the two brothers. Arguing about wills, arguing about who's going to have the most, arguing about what really matters most. If you've got your centre really and truly on Jesus Christ, then whatever we live our lives, however we live our lives, it will always come out right, because it will be to do first and last with our attitude towards God.